More on the story, we can bring in our international affairs commentator, Douglas Herbert. Doug, great to see you. Democrats have been struggling over the past 6 weeks on how best to resist Donald Trump's policies. Will that speech, will that rebuttal from the Democratic Congresswoman help?
It's the beginnings of some sort of response. And it's important to say that because it is true that a lot of Democratic senators, lawmakers, have been coming under intense pressure. They've been taking the heat, really, from their constituents all over the country who say they are not doing enough, that they should be much firmer, they should be stauncher in doing something to firmly oppose what they see as a dangerous consolidation of power by essentially what they see as a rogue administration, and that they have been sort of asleep at the wheel. So there's been a lot of Dem bashing within Democratic ranks about the perceived weakness of Democrats. You have Melissa Slotkin going along, right? Because going into this address, there had been talk among Democrats. They had held meetings among themselves.
How to react.
How to react. Should they maybe bring into the chamber things like red cards, little pocket constitutions, egg cartons? They backed away from that. You know, party leaders, top party leaders, including the former Senate Majority Speaker Nancy Pelosi, had advised her Democratic colleagues, don't become part of the story. Don't do anything that could potentially backfire on you, i.e. bringing eggs into the chamber. It could turn on you. MAGA media will say, oh, Democrats wanted to throw eggs at Donald Trump, even if they didn't have that intention. So it's very difficult, right? They've been asking this question that you asked, what do we do? It's not business as usual in Washington anymore. We have to do something, but how do we do something? There's no one right way. Then you have Melissa Slotkin come along, and she said this message was, she had some advice, some real advice, and engagement was at the heart of that advice, right? Saying we've been through this before in history, and the main thing is one, don't tune out. We know, I understand, I feel it. You're all exhausted. We're all exhausted. The hits just seem to keep on coming. You don't know where to turn next. It's too much, so tune out. She says, do not do it. That is essentially what Donald Trump, his administration, his cronies are all hoping for, that you will tune out, move on, and disengage. She's saying, hold your elected officials to account, including herself. She's saying, hold us to account. Go to town halls, ask questions, ask for answers, vote, basically be engaged in that sense. And she says, organize. Organizing is really, you don't have to organize across the board. You can't be everywhere on every front all at once. But she says, engage citizens, basically organizing, choosing an issue, perhaps one issue that you're passionate about. Get out there and organize on behalf of that issue. Do not doom scroll. Yeah. Going on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, and tweeting away this or that. It's a bunch of noise. It's just going to feed that atmosphere. That doesn't work. So she did have the beginnings of some firm advice that perhaps Democrats can work with, because they are very much aware of the need to do something and also to be perceived as doing something more by their constituents who are as perhaps dazed and confused as a lot of Americans are at this moment.
As a lot of Democratic lawmakers are surely. Let's talk about, I know that this speech from Donald Trump was largely to a domestic audience, so he spoke about domestic politics.
Yes.
And typically we have foreign policy that comes in there in small doses, and we did have that last night, where we had the U.S. president who read out a letter he had received from Ukraine's president just a couple of days after that meeting in the Oval Office, basically suggesting that Vladimir Zelensky is ready to start talking peace.
Yeah, right away. There is that Ukraine issue. First of all, speaking to your first point, foreign policy is often, not always, but often punted to the very closing words of these types of congressional addresses by presidents, whether it's a State of the Union or this type of address last night. They're given short shrift. And you might say that that's a little surprising, given how much foreign policy has been so dominant in the first 6 weeks of this administration, right? Not a day goes by where there's not some dramatic headline on the Ukraine front, some dramatic headline out of the Mideast, whether it's regarding Syria or the Gaza conflict, so on and so forth. The trade tariffs. Foreign policy is rampant on every horizon wherever Americans turn. And yet Donald Trump, like you said, it was relegated in this speech. It got short shrift. End of the speech before he mentioned Ukraine. Ukraine he at least mentions, right? And you're right. He did read that letter from Zelensky in which, after Zelensky was I would say, shamelessly berated, rebuked by a tag team effort by Trump and his Vice President J.D. Vance, now comes the groveling part, right? Zelensky's up against it. He has no choice. He's doing what perhaps his advisors and others have said. You have to sort of do what Macron and Keir Starmer, the French and British leaders, did before you in that same week. You have to grovel a bit. You have to play to Donald Trump's ego. You have to flatter the guy. You have to butter him up because, as everyone has said, you can't do it without the U.S. So he's been doing that. He's been weighing in with the groveling. He's once again thanked Donald Trump. By the way, I will note that there's a lot of memes going around the internet saying that, in fact, since the full-scale invasion in 2022, he has thanked the U.S. and the American people 94 times. That's one estimate, 94 times. So not at all, but 94 times. So that's happening, at least. But in the same breath, Donald Trump, or in the next breath, after saying, I got a very important letter from Zelensky, says, and I also see strong signals from Moscow that they're ready to do peace. So there is this sort of equal playing field, this false equivalency between the actions of Russia on the one hand, Ukraine on the other, as if they each have equal responsibility to make these peace talks happen right now on Donald Trump's timeline. So he said, wouldn't that be a beautiful thing if it happened? He got loud cheers from the Republicans in the room.
The Republicans in the room, rank and file, getting behind him.
Barely no mention, Middle East, brush that over. What he did do is he reiterated what has become now sort of the headline claims that he wants to claim back, he wants to take Greenland, claim the Panama Canal for America. So this expansionist sort of back to the 19th century imperial theme that resonated very much in this address. And he had one, what I would call a disgraceful jab, a broadside at Lesotho, called the Kingdom of the Sky, a country which he said, who's ever heard of Lesotho? He was talking about aid going to different programs. So he slammed Lesotho, and there's been some pushback on the internet about Lesotho being 1,000 meters high, which is higher than Donald Trump's approval ratings have ever gotten. We're from Lesotho. We're proud of Lesotho. We're not your punchline, Mr. President. So that's where foreign policy sort of started and ended in this speech by Donald Trump.
Douglas, thank you very much for that, Douglas Herbert there. As Douglas